She told him to run, but he crossed the desert carrying the alien for 3 days. The desert didn't forgive. It didn't care if you were human, alien, or a miracle from the heavens. It would strip you down a bone and dust all the same. Ethan Cole knew this better than anyone. He had been walking for 37 hours when the first hallucinations started creeping into his mind. Heat shimmered on the horizon like molten glass, distorting the jagged outline of a canyon far ahead. Every step sent shocks through his legs, the servos of his exoskeleton whining in protest. In his arms, she was weightless in the way a dying person becomes weightless, all limp muscle and fading warmth. Her skin was a deep, luminescent blue, the kind of hue that would look otherworldly even under the pale light of a hospital. Under the merciless sun, it looked almost like polished sapphire. Her hair, also blue, but darker, like strands of midnight, clung to her damp forehead. She had begged him to leave her behind. Not once, not twice, dozens of times since the moment they'd escaped the crash site. "You will not make it carrying me," she had whispered in her accented English. Her voice was airy, like wind slipping through cracked stone. "The desert will take us both." He'd ignored her then, and he ignored her now. The HUD on his helmet kept flashing critical alerts. Power drain, 22% remaining. Without the exoskeleton, the trek would be impossible. The weight of her, the heat, the soft but constant shifting of sand under his boots, all of it would collapse him within minutes. But he wasn't going to put her down. Not after what she'd done for him in that canyon. The wind kicked up, bringing with it the sting of fine grains that bit at his cheeks and rattled against his visor. He shifted his grip on her, cradling her closer, her head resting just under his chin. For a second, he caught the faintest smell of something floral, impossible in this wasteland. He wondered if it was her scent, or just another trick of his overheating brain. Behind them, the wreckage of the dropship was already a mirage in the distance, swallowed by the shimmering waves of heat. He hadn't seen any pursuit drones for hours, but that didn't mean they weren't coming. She stirred weakly. Her eyes, wide, luminous, almost silver against the blue, flickered open. "Why, Ethan?" she asked, her voice rasping. "Why do this? You do not owe me life." He kept walking. "You saved mine first." She closed her eyes again, as if that answer was too heavy to carry. Above, a black speck circled in the blistering sky, a vulture analog, its wings stretched wide. It reminded him that out here, everything that moved was only a future meal for something else. The canyon ahead was their only hope. According to his map, if he could reach the Shadowed Gorge, there was a chance of finding the abandoned mining station. If the water purifiers still worked, they might live through the night. His steps slowed as the exoskeleton's servos began to misfire. Every few paces, his knee joint would lock for a fraction of a second, throwing off his balance. The desert floor seemed to tilt and sway beneath him, the horizon pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. She shifted again in his arms, her breath shallow but steady. A strand of her midnight hair fluttered in the hot wind. For a moment, he thought she was going to speak, but then her hand slipped weakly against his armor, and her head lolled toward his shoulder. The HUD beeped again. Power drain, 19% remaining. The numbers didn't scare him as much as they should have. What scared him was the silence between the beeps, the endless emptiness around them, broken only by the crunch of boots on sand and the faint mechanical groan of his suit. Once, he had been a soldier. Once, he had been told exactly when to advance, when to retreat, when to pull the trigger. Now there was no command, no mission objective, just a promise he hadn't spoken aloud, but carried like a stone in his chest. He was going to get her to safety. The canyon walls began to rise ahead of them, warped and jagged, the color of rusted iron. Shadows stretched toward them like long, reaching fingers. Relief sparked in his chest. Not joy, not yet, but the distant possibility of it. Then the ground shuddered. It was subtle at first, like the tremor of an engine deep below the earth. Then it grew, rattling through his boots, sending small rivulets of sand cascading down the dunes. Somewhere ahead, a sharp crack rang out, followed by a deep, rolling sound like distant thunder. Her eyes snapped open. "Not safe," she whispered. "Something moves beneath." He scanned the horizon, his helmet sensors fighting through the heat haze. Nothing. Just the canyon, the dunes, the oppressive blue of the sky. But the tremor came again, stronger now, a vibration he could feel in his teeth. His grip on her tightened. The HUD screamed warning. Seismic activity detected. Ethan didn't stop. He pushed forward, every step dragging the exoskeleton closer to collapse. Every jolt of movement making his legs feel like they were wading through molten lead. The canyon was close. If he could make it into the shade before whatever was under the sand decided to surface. A shadow flitted across them, fast, deliberate. Not from the sun, from above, something alive. He didn't look up. He just kept moving. Because if he looked and saw what was hunting them, he wasn't sure he'd be able to keep walking. The canyon was close enough now that Ethan could see the fissures in its walls, jagged scars carved by centuries of wind and rare, violent rain. The shadows spilling from between those cliffs looked like salvation. But the tremors underfoot were no longer distant. They rolled through the sand in steady pulses, each one stronger than the last. The alien woman, her name was Soraya, shifted in his arms, her fingers twitching against the metal plate of his chest armor. She whispered something in her native tongue, the syllables sharp and urgent, before switching to English. "It hunts us." Ethan's jaw tightened. "What is it?" Her silver-flecked eyes met his for just a second. "Not what? Which?" "The one that killed my crew." That was enough to make his throat dry out, even more than the desert heat already had. A ripple passed under the sand just 30 yards to his left, like the wake of something swimming just beneath the surface. Another one appeared on his right, closer this time. His helmet's motion tracker flared red, struggling to keep up with the erratic movement. "Hang on," he muttered, adjusting his grip and leaning forward. The exoskeleton's servos whined as he forced them into a sprint. Each step was a gamble. If one knee actuator locked again at this speed, they'd both faceplant into the burning sand. The ripples followed. Soraya's breathing quickened. "It hears the vibrations," she said. "Every step is a signal. You must move without rhythm." He almost laughed. "Without rhythm? Lady, I've got 180 pounds of alien royalty in my arms, and my legs are—" The sand erupted behind them. A geyser of dust and grit exploded upward, followed by something smooth, segmented, and impossibly fast. It was pale and glistening, the color of bleached bone. For an instant, Ethan caught a glimpse of a mouth, if you could call it that, lined with concentric rings of jagged teeth. The thing dove back under the surface before he could even raise his weapon. A low, bone-deep vibration followed it, circling them like a shark. Soraya clutched his armor. "If you stop, it will take us." "Wasn't planning on stopping," Ethan growled. He darted to a patch of ground littered with chunks of rock. If he could keep to the stones, maybe— The ground ahead burst upward. The creature's massive head, or maybe its midsection, it was impossible to tell, arched into the air, scattering sand in all directions. Sunlight glinted off translucent plates running down its length, each one big enough to serve as a dinner table. Ethan skidded sideways, the exoskeleton's hydraulics hissing. The thing slammed down where they'd been a second earlier, shaking the ground so hard his teeth clicked. Soraya's voice was tight with pain. "Faster, Ethan." The rocks were still a dozen yards away. Between here and there was nothing but open sand, a death sentence if the creature decided to strike again. But he didn't see another option. He shifted her weight, crouched low, and launched forward in a lopsided sprint, trying, absurdly, to vary his steps like she'd said. It worked for about 3 seconds. Then the sand to his right bulged upward, splitting open like wet fabric, and the creature lunged. Its maw was a spinning blur of teeth and sinew, opening wide enough to swallow them whole. Ethan threw himself sideways, hitting the ground hard enough to make his visor crack at the edge. The thing slammed into the spot they'd been in, its body whipping overhead in a blur of ivory and shadow before disappearing into the dunes again. His suit's power readout plummeted, 16% remaining. The strain of those desperate moves was draining the exoskeleton faster than he could afford. "Rocks," Soraya said, pointing weakly toward the outcropping. He pushed himself up, grit grinding between the armor's joints, and ran. The air was hot enough to sear his throat, but the dark shapes ahead grew larger with each step. The moment his boots hit the first patch of stone, he felt the difference. No more shifting sand, no more treacherous give beneath his feet. They stopped in the shadow of a boulder taller than a shuttlecraft. Ethan braced against it, setting Soraya down for the first time in nearly 2 days. She winced as her bare legs touched the rock, the heat searing even through her alien skin. He turned to face the dunes. The creature was circling just beyond the rocky patch, its pale, segmented body rippling the sand. It didn't come closer. Soraya pulled her knees to her chest. It will wait. They always wait. Eh? He asked. She nodded faintly. This desert is not empty. The worms are old, older than the mines, older than the colonies. They know patience. Ethan scanned the horizon. The canyon's mouth was still another quarter-mile away. Between here and there, pure sand, and a predator that could sense the vibration of every step. His exoskeleton's cooling system whined, barely keeping up with the temperature. If it overheated before they made the canyon, he'd be forced to walk on his own power, and that meant they wouldn't make it at all. He crouched beside her. How bad? Her eyes flickered open, the silver in them dull now. I can walk for a while, but I am slow. It will find me. He looked back at the dunes. The worm was gone, at least from sight, but he knew it was still there, just under the surface. There were no good options. None that didn't end with one of them buried under the sand. Ethan adjusted the rifle slung across his back, his fingers tracing the worn grip. If he could distract the thing long enough for her to make it to the canyon. Soraya's hand shot out, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. Do not think it. You will not trade yourself for me. I'm not trading, he said. I'm buying time. Her expression hardened. I saved you because I chose to. If you throw your life away now, you waste my choice. For a moment, they stared at each other, the wind hissing over the rocks, carrying with it the faint sound of shifting sand. Finally, Ethan looked away. Then we need another plan. They spent the next few minutes scanning the rocky outcrop. It wasn't much. A handful of boulders, some jagged shards, a thin ridge running east toward the canyon. The ridge, maybe. If they could stay on it, they'd keep their steps on stone almost the whole way. The problem? The ridge dipped twice into sand pits that were too wide to jump, and there was no telling if the worm would attack from the side. Ethan tightened the seals on his gloves. We move on the ridge. When we hit the pits, I'll run you across before it knows where we are. Soraya didn't answer right away. Then she nodded once, sharp and deliberate. They set off again, the canyon looming larger with each step, the rocks ringing dully under the weight of his exoskeleton. Behind them, somewhere in the dunes, the sand shifted, waiting. The ridge was a spine of stone running like a fragile lifeline toward the canyon. Ethan's boots struck its uneven surface with heavy, deliberate steps, the servos of his exoskeleton adjusting for balance. Soraya clung to his back now, arms hooked loosely around his neck, conserving what little strength she had left. Every step was a gamble. The ridge was narrow, sometimes only 3 feet wide, with sheer drops into the dunes on either side. Down there, the sand looked calm, still innocent. Ethan knew better. They reached the first pit. It wasn't big, maybe 10 yards across, but it was enough to give the worm an opening. He crouched low, feeling the heat radiate off the rock beneath him, and whispered, "When I run, hold tight." Soraya didn't respond, just tightened her grip. Ethan bolted. The exoskeleton's hydraulics kicked hard, propelling them across the sand in uneven, arrhythmic strides. He tried to vary the timing of his steps like she'd told him before, but adrenaline made it impossible to be graceful. The sand shifted underfoot halfway across. A bulge rose just behind them, swelling fast. "Go!" Soraya hissed in his ear. He dove the last 2 yards on a rock, skidding to a stop. A split second later, the sand behind them exploded upward. The worm's head, if it could be called a head, burst through in a cascade of grit, the sun catching on its translucent plates. Rows of teeth spun like saw blades inside its circular maw. It slammed back into the sand with a low, resonant thump that Ethan felt in his bones. Soraya was breathing hard against his back. "It is playing with us. Then we need to make it regret the game," Ethan muttered, pulling the rifle from his shoulder. The weapon hummed as it powered up, a faint blue light running along its barrel. They kept moving along the ridge, the canyon now less than half a mile away. The shadows inside it looked deeper, cooler, a promise of safety that felt almost real. The second pit was wider, too wide to sprint across in one burst. Ethan stopped at the edge, scanning the sand. It was motionless, but that meant nothing. Soraya slid off his back, swaying slightly. "We will not make it if we cross together." "I'm not leaving you behind," he said, sharper than intended. "I can distract it," she countered. "You take the ridge to the canyon. When you are safe, you call me on the comm." "No," he cut her off. "We cross together." Her lips tightened, but she didn't argue further. Ethan scanned the pit again. A plan formed. Risky, stupid, but the only one that gave them both a chance. He set her down on the stone. "When I say, you run. Don't stop until you hit the rock on the other side." "What will you?" "Just run." He stepped onto the sand first, stomping hard. The vibrations were deliberate this time, each one heavier than the last. Within seconds, the worm responded, the ground trembling as something massive surged toward him beneath the surface. "Now," he shouted. Soraya bolted across the pit, her bare feet kicking up sprays of sand. The worm broke through in front of Ethan, all pale armor and spinning teeth. He fired. The rifle's pulse cracked the air, slamming into the side of its head. A chunk of translucent plate shattered, spraying shards across the pit. The worm recoiled, thrashing wildly. Sand erupted around it in waves, the heat haze turning the scene into a blur of light and motion. Ethan fired again, the recoil jolting his shoulder. The second shot caught it lower, tearing into soft tissue between its plates. The worm let out a sound, not a roar, but a deep, vibrating bellow that seemed to shake the air itself. It dove for him. Ethan jumped sideways, landing hard on the sand. The exoskeleton groaned under the strain. The worm's maw slammed into the spot where he'd been, teeth grinding rock fragments into dust. Soraya had made it to the other side. She was screaming something at him, words lost in the chaos. The worm swung toward him again. Ethan didn't wait. He ran, legs burning, power levels plummeting. The ridge's far edge felt impossibly far away. The sand bulged to his left, the worm tracking him. 5 yards. It surged upward again, but this time Ethan dove forward, letting his momentum carry him onto the ridge's stone. The worm's head crashed into the edge, chipping off a chunk of rock and spraying shards across them both. Ethan scrambled up, panting, the rifle still in his hands. The worm lingered at the edge of the pit, its massive body undulating slowly beneath the sand. A dark ichor seeped from the wound in its side, hissing as it hit the hot surface. "It will follow us," Soraya said. "Then we keep moving," Ethan replied, though his voice was ragged. They hurried along the ridge, the canyon now close enough for Ethan to see the jagged shadows within. But every few seconds, the sand to either side bulged, the worm keeping pace. Power levels, 12%. Cooling system at 76% capacity. If either failed before they reached shade, the suit would lock up, and he'd be dead weight. The ridge dipped, becoming more uneven. Loose stones skittered away under his boots, tumbling into the dunes. The worm surged closer at each slip, like it could sense their weakening pace. "Almost there," Ethan said, though it was as much for himself as for her. Then the ridge ended. A sheer drop of 15 feet led to a narrow strip of sand at the canyon's mouth. Beyond that, jagged rock walls rose like teeth, the shade between them deep and cool. Ethan looked at Soraya. "We jump." She hesitated, glancing at the sand below. "It will strike the moment we land. Then we don't give it the chance." He adjusted his grip on her, took 2 steps back, and launched forward. They cleared most of the drop, hitting the sand running. Ethan didn't stop. He sprinted straight for the canyon, boots pounding an irregular rhythm. The worm erupted behind them, massive head arcing through the air, maw wide enough to blot out the sun for an instant. Ethan dove through the canyon's threshold just as it slammed into the rock, sending tremors up the cliff walls. Shards rained down, clattering across the canyon floor. They collapsed in the shadowed gorge, the air suddenly cooler but still thick with dust. Soraya was breathing hard, clutching her side. Ethan's HUD blinked. Power, 8% remaining. The worm's head lingered at the canyon mouth for a long, tense moment before sinking back into the sand. Ethan looked at Soraya. "We made it." Her silver eyes met his. "For now." The canyon swallowed the sunlight within 30 feet, turning the burning gold of the desert into muted rust and shadow. The drop in temperature was immediate, a 15-degree relief that made Ethan's overheated systems sigh in mechanical gratitude. His HUD's warning icons dimmed slightly, though the power, 8% alert, still pulsed like an unwelcome heartbeat. The walls around them rose like skyscrapers of jagged rock, streaked with veins of black and copper. The air smelled faintly metallic, like rain on iron. Somewhere deeper in the gorge, water might trickle over stone, or maybe that was just wishful thinking. Soraya staggered forward a few steps before Ethan caught her by the arm. Her breathing was shallow, but there was a sharpness in her eyes again. "The worm will not come in here," she said. He glanced back toward the bright rectangle of desert at the canyon's mouth. "Because it's too narrow. Because something worse lives here." Ethan's grip tightened on his rifle. "Define worse." She shook her head. "You will know when we see it." The canyon twisted left, then right, narrowing until the two of them had to walk single file. Loose gravel crunched under Ethan's boots, and somewhere above, the occasional pebble rattled down from the cliffs, making his finger twitch near the trigger. They emerged into a wider chamber, an open space maybe 50 yards across, lit by a shaft of sunlight filtering through a crack in the canyon roof. In the center stood a rusted structure, half collapsed and covered in layers of dust. The mining station. Ethan's heart kicked. "We found it." The building looked like it had been abandoned for decades. One wall had caved inward, revealing the skeletal remains of machines and overturned crates. A single solar array, shattered and dangling from its mount, creaked faintly in the breeze. Soraya crouched beside a metal drum, running her fingers along the faded logo stenciled on its side. "Your people built this." "Not mine," Ethan said, stepping inside. "Corporate contractors. Same ones who stripped half the colonies bare." Inside, the air was cooler but stale. Dust coated everything, a fine gray powder that clung to his gloves and boots. In one corner, a row of empty water barrels stood like silent sentinels. He found the purifier in the back room, half buried under debris. It was old, but the casing was intact. If the internal membranes weren't rotted, it might still work. Soraya leaned against the doorway, watching him. "Even if it runs, there is nothing to filter." "We'll find water," he said, prying open the access panel. This place had to have a cistern. As if on cue, a deep, echoing sound rolled through the canyon. It wasn't the rumble of the worm. This was higher, almost vocal. A long, rising call that ended in a sharp, guttural click. Ethan froze. "That your worst thing?" Soraya's silver-flecked eyes darkened. "Yes." The sound came again, closer this time. It reverberated off the walls, making it impossible to tell from which direction it came. Ethan slung his rifle forward, scanning the jagged entrances around the chamber. Something moved in the shadows, fast, low to the ground. "Back," Soraya hissed. They retreated toward the mining station's collapsed wall. A shape emerged into the shaft of sunlight, and Ethan's stomach dropped. It was tall, easily 8 feet, with skin like polished obsidian. Its limbs were long and jointed in ways that made his brain itch, bending forward and backward in the same motion. The head was narrow, crowned with a fan of bony spines that shimmered faintly in the light. Its eyes, if you could call them that, were a cluster of glinting orbs, each one swiveling independently to track them both. It stepped forward, its movement eerily silent despite its size. When it opened its mouth, there were no teeth, just a smooth, black interior that seemed to drink in the light. Soraya whispered, "A shade hunter." Ethan kept his voice low. "What is a hunt?" She looked at him like the answer should be obvious. "Everything." The shade hunter tilted its head, then crouched, its spines folding flat against its back. Ethan didn't need a translator to know what that posture meant. It lunged. Ethan fired. The pulse round lit up the dim chamber, striking the hunter square in the chest. The impact knocked it back a step, but it didn't fall. Instead, it let out a sharp, metallic shriek and darted sideways, vanishing into the shadows like smoke. He swept the rifle in an arc, scanning. Where? It hit him from the left, faster than his eyes could track. The blow sent him sprawling into the dust, his exoskeleton's HUD flashing power, 6%. Soraya grabbed a shard of metal from the debris and swung at the hunter, catching it across the side of its head. The creature staggered, hissing, before retreating again into the dark. "You heard it?" Ethan asked, pulling himself up. She shook her head. "I annoyed it. That is not the same thing." The hunter's call echoed again, this time answered by a second call. Higher, sharper. Ethan swore. "There's more than one." They backed toward the canyon wall. The mining station now just a half-collapsed barrier between them and the dark entrances. A second hunter emerged opposite the first, its spine slightly shorter, but its body just as fluid and lethal. The two creatures began to circle in perfect sync, their movements mirrored like predators that had hunted together for centuries. Ethan's grip tightened on the rifle. 2 shots, maybe 3, before the power cell overheated. And his suit didn't have the charge for a prolonged fight. Soraya's hand brushed his. "If you already chose to save me once," she said quietly, "you must keep choosing it. I'm not planning on dying here." The hunters lunged in unison. Ethan's first shot caught one in the torso, spinning it sideways. The second missed entirely as the other vaulted over him, landing between them and the canyon exit. They were trapped. The shade hunters closed in, their silent steps muffled by the dust. Ethan could see the faint shimmer of heat distortion around their bodies, like the air itself was bending away from them. Soraya stepped forward, her voice ringing sharp and clear in a language Ethan didn't understand. The hunters hesitated, just for a heartbeat, but it was enough for Ethan to grab her and dive through the narrow gap between the two. They hit the canyon floor, running deeper into the shadows. The hunters followed. Ethan didn't look back. He could feel them, hear them, every step bringing them closer. His HUD flashed again, power 4%. Somewhere ahead, water glistened in the dim light, a thin stream cutting across the canyon floor. Salvation and danger in equal measure. And Ethan knew, whatever choice he made next, it would change everything. If you've ever rooted for an impossible love, you know what's at stake here. Subscribe. There are more stories like this waiting for you. The thin stream of water shimmered under the fractured light, spilling through a crack high above. It was barely more than a trickle, but to Ethan's eyes it was a lifeline. The shade hunters, however, didn't slow. They moved with a predator's certainty, weaving around the canyon walls, their black forms melting in and out of shadow like living obsidian. Ethan pushed Soraya ahead. "Stay low. Keep moving toward the water." She gave him a sharp look over her shoulder. "You are slowing." "My suit's slowing," he corrected, glancing at the HUD. Power 3%. That number was a death sentence in a place like this. Once the exoskeleton shut down, he'd be dragging himself through the dust on raw muscle, and that wouldn't get either of them far. The hunters circled wider now, forcing them toward the middle of the canyon floor. One moved to block their path, lowering itself into a predatory crouch. The other slid along the wall to cut off their retreat. "They're hurting us," Ethan said under his breath. Soraya's silver-flecked eyes narrowed. For the kill. The one in front of them lunged first, spines flaring outward in a fan of jagged bone. Ethan fired. The pulse slammed into its chest, scorching a blackened crater but not stopping it entirely. It recoiled with a metallic screech, buying them a moment. Ethan shoved Soraya forward. "Go!" They splashed into the shallow water, cold seeping through Ethan's boots like an electric shock. He felt the exoskeleton's sensors spike. Cooling surge detected, but the relief was short-lived. The HUD dimmed, the warning pulsing. Power 2%. The second hunter struck from behind. Ethan spun, catching a blow on his forearm. The force drove him back a step, the servos in his knee whining under the impact. He fired point-blank into its shoulder. The shot blew it sideways into the canyon wall, but the thing landed on all fours, claws digging into the stone, and came again. Soraya's voice cut through the chaos. "The water." Ethan didn't have time to ask. She stepped into the stream and plunged her hands beneath the surface. The water hissed, and a faint glow began to spread outward from her fingertips, coloring the stream an otherworldly blue. The hunters stopped. It wasn't hesitation, it was instinct. They backed away from the glowing water, their movements jerking now, less certain. "What's happening?" Ethan asked, keeping the rifle trained. Soraya's voice was tight with effort. "They fear it." My people, we can infuse water with a frequency they cannot endure, but will not last. Then we make it count. They moved downstream, keeping to the glowing current. The hunters followed at a distance, their black forms flickering in and out of sight behind the canyon's twists. Ethan's suit was dying fast. Power, 1%. Cooling, 42%. Hydraulics sluggish. Every step felt heavier, like wading through deep mud. The stream led them to a narrow fissure in the canyon wall, barely wide enough for Ethan to squeeze through. Soraya slipped inside first, her movements surprisingly quick for someone who had been nearly unconscious hours ago. Inside, the fissure opened into a small chamber. The walls glittered faintly with mineral deposits, and the stream pooled in the center, still glowing with Soraya's touch. The air was cooler here, almost damp. Ethan leaned against the wall, chest heaving. His HUD blinked its final warning. Power critical, 0% imminent. Soraya knelt at the pool, cupping water in her hands. She drank, then looked at him. You need to take off the suit. Not a good idea while those things are still out there. It will die in minutes, she said. When it locks, you will be trapped inside. If they come, you will not even be able to raise your weapon. He swore under his breath, but began disengaging the seals. The suit released with a hiss, the weight lifting from his body in stages until he stepped out, muscles protesting under their own load for the first time in days. He felt suddenly smaller, exposed. Soraya handed him a handful of glowing water. Drink. The taste was metallic, but strangely clean. A faint warmth spread through his chest almost immediately, cutting the edge of his exhaustion. They sat in silence for a few moments, the glow of the pool painting the chamber walls in shifting shades of blue. Outside, a low guttural call echoed down the canyon. One hunter, maybe both. They will not give up, Soraya said softly. Ethan met her gaze. Neither will I. Something flickered in her expression, then something not just gratitude, but a kind of recognition. She reached out, fingers brushing his wrist. Her skin was cool, smooth, the contact startling in its gentleness after so much violence. You could have left me at the crash, she said. Many would have. Most humans would have. Then I guess I'm not most humans. Her lips curved slightly, though the moment didn't last. The glow in the water was already fading. They will come when it's gone, she warned. And we cannot run without your suit. Ethan glanced at the exoskeleton lying inert against the wall. Then we make a stand here. Soraya's eyes sharpened. You would fight 2 shade hunters without your armor. I fought worse, he lied. The water's glow dimmed to a faint shimmer. Outside, claws scraped stone. The hunters were closing in again. Ethan checked the rifle. 3 charges left. Enough to kill one, if he was lucky. The other, well, he'd have to get creative. Soraya rose to her feet, standing beside him. Her midnight blue hair fell across her shoulder, catching the fading light. Then we fight together. Ethan gave a tight nod. We fight together. The glow died completely. The first hunter's silhouette appeared at the fissure's entrance, its spines brushing the stone. The second dropped from above, landing on all fours with a soft thud. They were trapped. The fissure's chamber seemed to shrink as the shade hunters stepped inside, their black, jointed limbs brushing the mineral-crusted walls. They moved without sound, their glinting cluster eyes tracking Ethan and Soraya like a pair of precision-guided weapons. Ethan raised his rifle, pulse humming in the chamber silence. 3 charges left, he reminded himself. Make them count. The first hunter inched forward, its spine scraping faintly against the stone. Behind it, the second crouched low, muscles coiled, blocking any hope of slipping past. They'll split, Soraya whispered. Which one's weaker? Ethan asked, his voice barely a breath. She tilted her head toward the one on the right, the one with a burn mark across its shoulder from his earlier shot. That one bleeds. He didn't need more encouragement. On my mark, you move. Before she could ask where, Ethan fired. The pulse hit the injured hunter dead center, slamming it into the wall hard enough to crack the stone. It let out a keening screech that bounced off the chamber walls like shrapnel. The second hunter reacted instantly, lunging toward Ethan. Soraya darted sideways, grabbing a loose shard of mineral from the wall. She slashed at its forelimb, scoring a faint line but drawing its attention away from him. Ethan swung the rifle toward it, But the injured one recovered faster than expected, surging between them with terrifying speed. Its spines flared again, forcing him back toward the pool. The chamber became chaos, black limbs striking from every direction, claws raking stone and armor. The pool's water splashed underfoot as they traded blows, the sharp tang of scorched chitin filling the air from each pulse shot. Soraya ducked under a sweeping strike, came up behind the injured hunter, and drove the mineral shard deep into the wound he'd made earlier. The creature spasmed, its limbs jerking in unnatural directions. Ethan took the opening. He fired again, the shot punching clean through its torso. It collapsed, black ichor spilling onto the stone and hissing where it touched the glowing mineral traces in the wall. One down. The remaining hunter shrieked, a high, ear-splitting sound that sent vibrations through Ethan's chest. It charged, faster than anything that size should move. Ethan barely had time to swing the rifle up. It hit him full force, sending him skidding across the chamber. His back slammed into the wall, the rifle clattering to the ground. Soraya screamed his name, the first time she'd used it, and grabbed the creature's spines. It twisted violently, throwing her aside, but the move bought Ethan a heartbeat. He rolled, snatched up the rifle, and fired his last shot straight into the hunter's face. The pulse hit just above its cluster eyes, the blast turning the front of its head into a spray of molten black and shattered bone. The creature staggered, stumbled, and collapsed beside its fallen counterpart. The chamber went silent except for the sound of their breathing. Ethan let the rifle drop to his side, his arms trembling. Soraya was already moving toward him. She knelt, her cool blue hands brushing over his jaw, his temple, checking for injuries. "You're hurt." "Not bad." He lied, though every muscle screamed. "You?" She shook her head, but there was a flicker of pain in her silver-flecked eyes. For a long moment, neither of them moved. They just stayed there, in the center of that blood-slicked chamber, the tension between them no longer born of fear alone. "You fought like one of us," Soraya said softly. He smirked despite the ache in his ribs. "Guess I'm learning from the best." Her expression softened, and she reached up, brushing a strand of midnight blue hair from her face. "When I first saw you in the canyon, I thought you would be another human who saw me as a burden. Now," she hesitated, her gaze steady on his, "now I know you would carry me across any desert." He didn't answer. Words felt too thin for what they'd just survived. Instead, he reached up and took her hand, his fingers closing around hers. For the first time since the crash, he felt something other than raw survival clawing at his thoughts. He felt anchored, not to a place, but to a person. She held his hand for a moment longer, then released it and glanced at the fallen hunters. "We must move before scavengers come. Shade hunter kills do not go unnoticed." Ethan looked at his powerless exoskeleton leaning in the corner. "We're not moving fast without that thing." Soraya's gaze slid to the glowing mineral seams in the wall. "These stones, my people use them to store energy. If we can charge your suit." "How long?" "An hour, maybe less, if we are lucky." They worked quickly, prying chunks of the mineral loose and arranging them around the suit's power core. Soraya placed her hands on the stones, and a faint hum began to fill the chamber. The mineral glowed, veins of light spreading outward into the suit's frame. As the suit drank in the energy, Ethan kept watch at the fissure entrance. Rifle in hand, though, it was useless without charge. The canyon beyond was still, but stillness was never safe here. "You trust me now?" she asked quietly as she worked. "I trusted you the moment you told me to run without rhythm," he said. She gave a faint, wry smile. "Then perhaps you will also trust me when I say the desert is not done with us." By the time the exoskeleton powered up to 15%, Ethan felt the canyon air shifting, a dry, hot gust funneling through the fissure, carrying with it the scent of dust and something metallic. Soraya straightened, her expression hardening. The worm. Ethan sealed the suit's locks, the hydraulics hissing as power returned to his limbs. "Round two." "Round two," she agreed, and for the first time, there was no fear in her voice, only resolve. They stepped out into the canyon together, side by side, shadows stretching long behind them. The canyon wind turned savage, sand lashing their faces like glass splinters. Ethan could hear it under the howl, the deep, resonant tremor of something colossal moving beneath the surface. Soraya's pupils narrowed, silver flecks flashing. It's hunting us. Ethan tightened the exoskeleton's grip around her. Then let's make it choke. The sand ahead bulged, split, and a spiraling tower of grit erupted into the sky. The worm tore free of the desert, its segmented body the width of a city bus, plated in armor that shimmered like molten bronze. Each segment flexed with terrifying force, propelling its bulk toward them. Its mouth gaped open, a circular maw of layered teeth, each the size of a machete. The air vibrated with the force of its roar. Ethan ran. The exoskeleton pounded over the canyon floor, hydraulics groaning with every stride. He could feel the suit straining. Only 15% charge, every step burning precious reserves. The worm followed, diving under the sand and bursting up again ahead of them, cutting off escape. Its movement was faster than before, more deliberate. It wasn't just hunting, it was angry. Soraya tapped his shoulder. The armor plates. Between them. That's where it's weakest. Good to know. Shame my gun's dry. She reached into her satchel, producing a jagged shard of the glowing mineral they'd taken from the fissure. Then we improvise. The worm lunged, body twisting, forcing them to dive aside. Ethan rolled, keeping his body over hers as sand cascaded over them. The creature's mouth smashed into the wall behind where they'd stood, stone splintering. Next time, we go at it, Soraya said, breathless. Ethan stared at her. You're insane. You carry me 3 days through hell. This is just the last mile. The worm wheeled in the sand, lining up for another charge. Ethan crouched, letting it come closer. The instant it breached the surface, he launched forward, hydraulics surging in a single, brutal leap. They slammed into its side. Ethan jammed the shard into the gap between plates, feeling it bite into softer flesh beneath. The worm screamed, a sound so loud it seemed to split the sky, and thrashed violently. The movement tore Ethan and Soraya free, flinging them across the canyon. The exoskeleton's systems blared damage warnings, and something in his left leg joint seized. He tried to stand and felt the suit's knee lock in place. The worm dove again, circling under the sand. He couldn't move fast enough now. Soraya scrambled to her feet, grabbed the shard, and ran toward the shifting dune where the worm would breach. Soraya. She didn't look back. The sand exploded, and she was already moving, climbing onto the worm's head like a storm-born shadow. Her blue hair whipped around her face as she drove the shard deep between the plates just above its maw. The creature convulsed, slamming its head side to side. She held on until it bucked her free, throwing her into the canyon wall. She hit hard, sliding down in a cloud of dust. Ethan's chest went cold. He forced the suit forward, dragging the locked leg, closing the distance between them as the worm reared to finish her. With no weapon and no time, he did the only thing left. He charged. The exoskeleton's remaining power flared, pushing its servos past safety limits. He slammed into the worm's open mouth, driving his armored forearms into the first row of teeth, wedging them apart. The creature thrashed, but Ethan held on, feeling the plates grind into his suit. Come on, you bastard. A deep hum pulsed through the armor. The mineral shard still lodged in its head was reacting with the worm's internal energy. Sparks of blue light raced along its segments. Soraya, he shouted. Now. She staggered to her feet, bleeding from a cut above her brow, and sprinted to the shard. With both hands, she drove it deeper. The worm's body arched like a drawn bow, a massive shockwave tearing through the canyon. The plate shattered outward in a spray of molten fragments, and the worm collapsed, its body twitching before going still. Silence. Ethan collapsed beside it, chest heaving. The suit's power meter was at 0. He could barely lift his arms. Soraya knelt beside him, pressing her forehead to his. You didn't let go. Neither did you. They stayed there for a moment, the only movement the slow settling of sand over the worm's massive corpse. Then she touched the exoskeleton's chest plate. We can't stay here. Others will smell the kill. He let out a tired laugh. Always the optimist. She smiled faintly. No, just realistic. But now, she squeezed his hand. We are realistic together. Ethan managed to smile back, despite the exhaustion pulling at him. Whatever came next, it would be together, and that thought alone felt like victory. The canyon was eerily still. The wind that had howled like a living thing earlier now whispered over the dunes, scattering thin veils of sand across the worm's shattered remains. Its body had begun to cool, the metallic sheen fading to dull ochre. Ethan leaned back against the canyon wall, the exoskeleton's weight pressing him into the stone. The suit was dead, servos silent, power cell burned out completely. Every movement now was manual, and it felt like dragging a corpse on his own body. Soraya stood a few meters away, inspecting the shard she had driven into the worm's head. It pulsed faintly, but the once brilliant glow had dimmed to a soft blue ember. She turned it over in her hands as if trying to read a language only she knew. "What's it saying?" Ethan asked, voice hoarse. She glanced at him. "That it's spent. Like you." He smirked faintly. "Glad I'm in such inspiring company." Her expression softened, and she walked toward him, kneeling so they were eye to eye. "You are different from most of your kind." "Yeah? How so?" "When danger comes, most run from it. You run toward it. Even when your body breaks, you keep going." He shrugged. 3 days carrying you through this wasteland. Kinda got used to not quitting." Her gaze lingered on him a beat longer. Then she placed the shard in the pouch at her side. "We need to move." "Not far. There's a shelter east of here. Old listening post. Abandoned after your people stopped using this sector." Ethan tried to stand, the exoskeleton groaning in protest. Pain flared through his right shoulder, where one of the worm's teeth had glanced off the armor and bruised deep. He hissed through clenched teeth. "Here," Soraya said, slipping under his arm and taking some of his weight. "We go slow." They crossed the canyon floor together, weaving around jagged rocks and the worm's colossal segments. The air smelled faintly of scorched metal and something organic, sharp and bitter. Overhead, the twin suns were sinking toward the horizon, staining the dunes in orange and crimson. By the time they reached the ridge, Ethan's legs were trembling. The sight on the other side almost made him forget the ache. A spire of ancient steel rising from the desert floor, its edges rusted but intact. The remains of a column's array clung to its peak, broken like the bones of some ancient giant. The shelter's entrance was half buried under sand. Soraya dug quickly, her movements efficient, revealing a narrow steel hatch. She pressed her palm to a circular pad, and with a reluctant hiss, it unlocked. Inside, the air was stale but cool. The corridor beyond was lit by faint emergency strips along the floor. Ethan stepped in, the shift from heat to shadow making his skin prickle. They found the main room, a circular space lined with dusty consoles, a single table, and a cot in the corner. Soraya set him down on the cot and began stripping the dead exoskeleton from his body piece by piece. The release of pressure made him groan in relief. "You're lucky," she said, checking the bruising along his ribs. "No fractures. Your suit absorbed most of it." "Feels like it absorbed a truck," he muttered. She worked silently for a few minutes, cleaning a shallow cut on his forearm with water from her canteen. Her touch was careful, precise. It struck him how strange it was. Only days ago, he didn't trust her, and she probably didn't trust him. Now, they were here, alive because of each other. "You saved me," he said quietly. She glanced at him, a small crease forming between her brows. "You saved me first. This is balance." They shared a faint smile, the kind forged in the aftermath of too many close calls. After tending to him, she moved to the console, brushing dust from the surface and checking its dim displays. "Power cell's low," she murmured, "but there's enough to send a short burst transmission." "To who?" Her silver-flecked eyes met his. "Someone who can get us out before another one of those things comes looking." He leaned back, letting the cot's thin mattress take his weight. "Not sure I'm ready to trust strangers again." She gave a small, almost amused exhale. "Then we'll trust each other a little longer." The night outside deepened, and the shelter felt smaller, the silence heavier. Somewhere in the distance, a low rumble echoed through the ground, too far to be a threat yet, but enough to remind them that the desert never truly slept. Soraya sat across from him at the table, the shard between them, glowing faintly in the dark. "What happens if we make it out of here?" Ethan asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, She reached across the table, her cool fingers brushing against his rough, calloused hand. Then, we find out if the rest of the universe is as dangerous as this desert. And for the first time in days, Ethan didn't feel like the thought of what comes next was a weight. It was something almost worth looking forward to. The desert was quiet, but the kind of quiet that wasn't peace, more like the breath before something else happened. Inside the shelter, the only sound was the faint hum of the backup generator, each flicker of the floor lights casting their shadows against the curved walls. Ethan lay on the cot, staring at the ceiling. He'd thought that after the fight, after making it here, the exhaustion would crush him into sleep instantly. But his mind wouldn't let go of the past 3 days. Every step in the sand, every time Soraya's weight shifted in his arms, every moment he'd thought they wouldn't make it. Soraya sat at the table again, the shard in her hands. The dim blue glow illuminated her features, the high curve of her cheekbones, the strange, liquid shimmer in her irises. She was tracing patterns on the shard's surface, patterns Ethan knew she saw differently than he did. "You've been staring at that thing since we got here," he said. "It remembers," she replied without looking up. "Remembers what?" Her gaze lifted to meet his. "Everything it touches. It holds the moments of the one who carried it. It will hold the way you didn't stop, even when the desert tried to take you." He let out a short laugh. "So I'm in some alien diary now." Her lips curved faintly. "Something like that. But not just words. Feelings. The weight of them." He shifted on the cot, wincing at a stab of pain in his ribs. "Guess I left a lot of weight for it to carry." For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, just full. Finally, Soraya set the shard on the table and leaned back. "When I told you to leave me, it wasn't because I wanted to die. It was because I thought you wouldn't survive if you stayed. And if I'd left, you'd be alive, but you wouldn't be here. And I wouldn't be." Ethan studied her. "You talk like being here, with me, is worth more than just surviving." She tilted her head, eyes narrowing slightly. "Isn't it? You fought a creature 3 times your size, with armor failing and strength fading. Not because you had to, because you chose to. That's rare, Ethan, even among my people." He didn't have an answer for that. Instead, he stared at the shard, its faint light pulsing in rhythm with some invisible heartbeat. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing sand against the shelter walls. It was a soothing sound compared to the roars and tremors of the past days. Soraya rose and walked toward him, sitting on the edge of the cot. "When I send the signal, someone will come. Maybe in hours, maybe in days. Once they do, our paths may split. May. Unless," she paused, searching his face, "unless you wanted to see what's beyond the edges of this desert. Beyond your world." He let out a slow breath. "You're talking about leaving Earth." "Yes. My people travel between worlds, sometimes for trade, sometimes for exploration. You've already survived what many of them would not. You could see places your kind has never walked." Ethan thought about the sky outside. 2 suns, alien constellations. The idea should have felt impossible. But after 3 days in the desert with her, impossible wasn't a word that carried much weight anymore. "You think I'd fit in out there?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "You fit here with me. The rest, you'd learn." The hum of the generator faltered for a second, then steadied. Soraya's gaze flicked to the corner of the room where the power conduits ran. "We have to be careful with the energy. I'll send the transmission at dawn. Until then, we rest." She rose, moving toward the table again, but Ethan caught her wrist gently. "Soraya." She stopped, looking down at him. "You said the shard remembers what it touches." "Yes." "Then take it with you, even if I don't come." Her eyes softened, a depth of emotion he hadn't seen from her before. She nodded once, slow. "It will carry you with me. Always." They stayed that way for a moment longer before she pulled free, returned to her chair. The shard's glow lit the room in pulses, as if it understood the weight of the promise that had just been made. Ethan finally let his eyes close, the tension in his muscles unwinding inch by inch. He didn't know if tomorrow would bring rescue or another fight for survival. But for the first time since the desert swallowed them, the uncertainty didn't feel like a threat. It felt like possibility. The sun rose over the desert like molten gold spilling across a sea of sand. From the small shelter, Ethan watched its light catch the jagged peaks in the distance, turning them from cold silhouettes into burning monuments. The wind was still, the air crisp in the early hours, a fleeting moment of calm before the heat returned. Soraya stood outside, her blue skin almost glowing under the dawn, the same color mirrored in her hair as it lifted in the faint breeze. She had her eyes closed, palms lifted toward the rising sun. Ethan didn't ask what it meant for her, a ritual, a prayer, or just the act of feeling the light on her skin. Some things didn't need translating. Inside, the comm unit flickered to life. A faint tone, followed by a repeating pattern of light. Soraya stepped back in, her expression unreadable. "They heard me," she said. He sat up on the cot, rubbing the back of his neck. "How long?" 2 hours, maybe 3. A transport vessel. It will land beyond those dunes. She gestured east, toward a cluster of shadowed ridges. "That's it then." He forced a smile. "Guess you're going home." Her eyes lingered on him. "I told you yesterday. That depends on what you choose." Ethan rose and began gathering the few things he had. A canteen, a half-burned flare, the knife that had nearly broken in the fight. He slid the items into a weathered pack. "And if I go, then this desert will be the smallest place you've ever known." There was no manipulation in her tone, no plea, just truth. When the time came, they stood side by side at the edge of the dunes. The heat was already rising, bending the horizon into a wavering mirage. Then the sky broke, a shadow descending, larger and larger until the transport ship roared overhead. Its hull was sleek, silver-streaked with black markings. It settled with a hiss, sand whipping in spirals around their legs. The ramp lowered. 2 figures emerged, tall, with armor of interlocking plates and eyes like molten silver. They said something in Soraya's language, their voices carrying in the wind. She responded, her tone steady. One of the aliens turned to Ethan, scanning him with a handheld device. It beeped softly, the display shifting through alien symbols. No weapons were raised, no threats made, just curiosity. "He's coming," Soraya told them. Ethan's pulse jumped. "Am I?" She looked at him like he already knew the answer. "Yes. You've already crossed one impossible distance. Another is just further." He exhaled slowly, then stepped toward the ramp. Each step felt like leaving pieces of himself behind. The man who had lived his entire life under one sky, who had once thought survival meant staying where you were safe. When they reached the top, Soraya pressed something into his hand. "The shard. It will remember you," she said. "And wherever we go next, it will tell your story." The ramp sealed behind them, the hum of the engines rising until the desert outside was nothing but a blur of gold and heat. Then the ground dropped away entirely. Ethan didn't look back, not because the desert didn't matter anymore, but because it had already given him everything it could. Her. Through the viewing glass, the horizon curved, and the sky darkened into the deep, infinite black of space. Stars spread before him like endless roads. Soraya stood beside him, her reflection overlapping his in the glass. "Ready?" she asked. He smiled. "I think I've been ready since the moment you told me to leave you behind." Somewhere far below, the desert kept its secrets. Up here, they were writing new ones. If you've ever believed in fighting for something, or someone, the way Ethan fought for Soraya, share this story with someone who needs to remember that impossible doesn't mean hopeless. And if you want to live more impossible adventures like this one, stick around. There are many more worlds to explore together.